All right. We're just getting connected here. Good evening. This is Melissa Schwartz. I am the gifted chair for the United Parent Council in PV Schools, and we're here tonight to welcome you to another collaboration with our gifted department, and I'll be introducing Elizabeth Warner in just a minute. But I just wanted to give a reminder about our next United Parent Council presentation that follows our UPC meeting on Wednesday, October 20th. Our meeting is at 9 a.m. and runs till about 10. And right after that, we will be doing a presentation on keeping your kids safe at school. I'll post a link in the chat shortly, but we want to get our presentation started so we can listen to this evening's presenter. Elizabeth Warner is our mentor program director, I guess, for the gifted department. So Elizabeth, will you share with us who we've got joining us tonight?
Absolutely. We I just want to say really quick, I put in the chat our Gifted in Paradise newsletter for parents and teachers. We have an event coming on the 20th, which is a virtual middle school gifted program introduction, and there is a link there to join. So before we get rolling with that, I wanted to make sure we know about that. And here we go. Our speaker tonight, I'm very excited. She joined us this afternoon. We had over 60 teachers who joined us to hear her message. This is Emily Kircher-Morris. She's inspired by her own experiences as a neurodivergent person and is dedicated to destigmatizing neurodiversity and supporting neurodivergent people of all ages. She started her career in education and is now in private practice near St. Louis, Missouri as a licensed professional counselor, where she specializes in supporting neurodivergent kids and adults, and of course their families. Emily hosts the Neurodiversity podcast, which explores the psychological, educational, and social needs for enriching the lives of neurodivergent people. She speaks statewide, national, and international conferences and frequently provides virtual and in-person professional development for educators, mental health clinicians, and parents worldwide. Emily is the author of 2 books related to the development of children and teens who are neurodivergent and cognitively gifted. Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners in Today's Classroom was just released in August of 2021 and focuses on supporting 2E learners in an educational setting. The forthcoming Raising Twice Exceptional Children, a handbook for parents of neurodivergent gifted kids, is on its way in January and is a guide for parents navigating the world of twice exceptionality. So welcome, Emily, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I am happy to be here. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Okay, so Elizabeth, does that look right to you?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm so happy to be here and to be invited to share with you. So, we're going to talk about a lot of different things and basically how you can really focus on supporting neurodivergent kids at home who are also cognitively gifted, which is kind of an interesting mix sometimes. And I think it's something that we are all learning more about as parents. And, I'll tell you a little bit about my path. So I actually am twice exceptional. So this is actually, let's see here. This is me over here on the edge with my very, very cool denim jacket. This is my gifted ed class back in like the late 80s or early 90s. And, it was an interesting time because while I was identified as gifted because my mom was a special educator and kind of asked for me to be tested, I was also diagnosed with ADHD when I was in 5th grade. And so that was kind of an interesting dynamic because at that time, first of all, girls really weren't identified as ADHD. We didn't have a term for twice exceptional. That was something that was really misunderstood. And I had teachers who just really never had really much of an idea about what to do with me. There are stories about, my first grade teacher tells the story that when I was in her classroom, my work was always correct. We just could never find it. And so she would dump out my desk to to try to dig through and find things. My fifth grade teacher did not feel that I should be allowed to go to the gifted education program because I struggled to get my work turned in her class. And she seemed to think that that was kind of a reward. However, the work that she wanted me to do was work that was about writing my spelling words 5 times each when I was one of the winners of the spelling bee most of the years for my class. And it was between the ADHD and the fact that I already knew how to do that. It was it was definitely a power struggle, and one that I was not at that time willing to give into. But it was difficult, and I would say that my career in school and also at home was really influenced by both of those factors, by being twice exceptional. And so when I got into my career, I went into education, and I knew I wanted to help kids who had been like me. So I started in education. I taught in a classroom, and then I actually got a master's in gifted certification, and I taught in gifted ed programs from elementary all the way through middle school. I taught in pull-out programs. I actually taught in a program for exceptionally gifted students, and I was a full-time teacher in that program. And, that was really interesting and gave me an opportunity to really support those kids. But the thing that I really loved most was that social and emotional piece. And I knew that even still, there were kids who needed more. So I went back and got a second master's in counseling and family therapy. And that allowed me to both work as a school counselor and also to start my private practice. And the wonderful thing about what I do now is that when I'm working with kids and their families, I really get to see that growth. I really get to see that change. And I knew I wanted to support twice exceptional kids. I never really knew how much of a specialization it was going to be. I really wanted to kind of work with gifted kids. That was really kind of what I thought I was getting into. But it really is the 2E kids who need a lot of support. And my background in the schools has really helped with that, as well as my experiences growing up. So I have 3 kids. So I'm also living this. My 2 older kiddos, I have an 8th grader and a 6th grader, and they are both twice exceptional. My 6th grader is really struggling with that transition to middle school this year. And so we're kind of adjusting to that. And then my 1st grader is doesn't have any labels or identifications yet, but we can probably, see the writing on the wall. There's some genetic factors that he's going to have a hard time escaping. And it's also interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about diagnosis as well. I often wonder for myself, if I were evaluated and diagnosed today, I suspect that I might also be identified as autistic, just because of the experiences that I had as a kid. But I know that at this point in my life, I would never meet diagnostic criteria. And it's kind of an interesting thing, that self-diagnosis piece, and reflecting as your kids go through things and what that really means, to have these different types of exceptionalities and how that influences how we operate in the world. So, beyond this, so I have all of these lived experiences, and that led me to kind of pursue some other opportunities. So as Elizabeth mentioned, this book was just published in August, Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners. And then this is the book that will be out in January, Raising Twice Exceptional Children. And I'm actually pulling some things from this book to share with you tonight. And then I also am host of the Neurodiversity podcast, which I would recommend. Obviously I would recommend it, but I would really tell you that it's excellent. First of all, my husband produces it, and he's a voice actor and a video and audio producer, so it sounds really, really good. And also, we have a lot of great episodes with experts in the field of giftedness and twice exceptionality and neurodiversity, and we really, there's an emphasis there on information for parents and educators, and people just kind of experiencing life themselves as neurodivergent individuals. So I think one of the first things that I kind of want to chat about is the big question. Should I label my child? So I know that it happens very often that parents of twice exceptional kids a lot of times start off with a gifted identification. And the reason for this is because of the way schools identify gifted learners, the fact that we often have universal screening, which means that all kids are assessed, and therefore those kids who are above when they're young get identified as gifted. And because they are cognitively gifted, they probably are also compensating for any areas of difficulty that they might be having. So, you're not going to see the characteristics of ADHD in a really young child necessarily. Like you might see some of that hyperactivity or that disorganization, but it's really not going to be until they're older that you start to really see some of those things manifest, like specifically in their schoolwork. Same with autism, they might have difficulties with emotional regulation, but a lot of times, like the social skills and those pieces, they might be able to get by in social situations, and it's not until they get older that it's more difficult. Students who might be dyslexic and gifted have enough background knowledge to compensate as they're reading, and they can kind of, make really great inferences. And so it appears that they are comprehending what they're reading, but as that content gets more difficult, they're less able to compensate there. I think one of the things about labeling a child is and the fear that goes along with that is it really is related to the stigma that is associated with many, neurodivergent diagnoses. Most people don't worry about labeling a child as gifted. That appears to often be okay. It's those other diagnoses that have just a really negative connotation along with them that we hesitate about. But what I have found is that for most kids, having a diagnosis, having a label is something that explains what's going on. It empowers them and moves them from feeling like I'm bad or I'm broken or I'm never doing anything right to, okay, this is how my brain is wired. Some things are easy for me, some things are more difficult, and I need to find some ways to work around them. There's a concern that a lot of parents have about worrying that kids will use a diagnosis as an excuse. And I say, that's a valid concern. There are some kids who will then, develop some learned helplessness and not want to attempt certain tasks. But ultimately, we can work through that. And, as kids get older and they start to realize these things, adults now who are having, a late diagnosis of neurodiversity or twice exceptionality are looking back and reflecting on their lives and wishing, oh my gosh, I wish I knew then what I know now. It would have made such a difference. We have to also realize, that twice exceptional kids often are diagnosed much later than their same age peers because of those compensatory strategies. And so we want to be on the lookout for those things so that we can make sure that we're having the opportunity to be proactive. And, I think really being able to find neurodiversity affirming support, opportunities for kids and for you as their parents to understand what that diagnosis means and, the strengths that go along with it, as well as the struggles. Nobody's denying that ADHD and autism and dyslexia, some of these different labels are disabilities. They are disabilities, but they are also things that have certain characteristics and strengths that go along with them. For example, there's research that shows that ADHDers tend to be more creative and have better divergent thinking skills, again, because they kind of have some of that response inhibition difficulties. They just kind of bounce from topic to topic. And so while that is a struggle when they are rushing through their work and trying to get something done, when it comes to brainstorming, that's really great. There's some evidence that shows that dyslexic students tend to have really strong visual spatial awareness. And autistic kiddos are really excellent, at identifying patterns and abstract reasoning and gathering information on that special interest topic and knowing everything in depth about that topic. Those are strengths, but they also come along with some difficulties. And so we want kids to have that awareness to be able to, find the support that they need. One of the questions that I often get, when we're talking about supporting twice exceptional kids is about managing academics. And so this is just a really big piece because we want them to have the best educational opportunity that they can. And how do we handle it so that they're challenged enough, but not, not too challenged, but also not bored? So, part of what this is really is about, we really want to help them find that challenge, harness their ability, and have opportunities. And so finding those opportunities, whether it's within your school or whether it is within the community or online, finding ways for kids to pursue their passions is a great way to help them stay motivated and engaged in their learning process. And so we want to make sure that they're having those opportunities. I would also say that the other piece of this is that as kids get older, just because a child is gifted doesn't mean that they should take all of the advanced classes. I think that sometimes, especially our gifted kids, they tend to put that on themselves quite often. They think that that is their own experience or their own, requirement that they should do these things. And we have to really help them make some good decisions about this. What is the right challenge? How much can you handle? What's going to make you burn out? What's really not your interest? Like if you're not really interested in history and you're not planning to go into a field related to that, do you really need to take that AP history course? I mean, maybe you want the college credit for it, but you just have to weigh that out and really make some of those decisions. We also want to just make sure that we're finding the right fit and advocating for support services as well as gifted services. So twice exceptional kids can be successful in the gifted education classroom, although they might need some accommodations. They also might need either special education services through an individualized education plan or IEP, or they might need just some accommodations through a Section 504 plan. And essentially, if your child is struggling and they have a diagnosis, or you think they might have a diagnosis, you should definitely talk to the school, talk to their gifted ed teacher, their general ed classroom teacher, whoever it might be that kind of knows them and understands them, and ask what the steps are and what might be available to help. One of the things that I often like to tell parents is, and teachers actually, is that if your child is getting supports at school, please make sure that they are documented. We want to make sure that those accommodations are documented because a paper trail is really necessary at different times. So say, for example, your child maybe needs extended time on a standardized test as they get older, the ACT or an AP test. It needs to be documented so that they can access those accommodations. And then one of the other pieces about just managing those academics is supporting them at home and figuring out what are some realistic expectations and bringing kids into that process. So I'll kind of share a little story. So like I mentioned, my daughter's having a difficult time adjusting to the middle school environment. And in her gifted ed class that she has, I got an email yesterday, and the first unit that the sixth graders do is on the brain and psychology and understanding the different parts of the brain and what they all do. And she failed the test. She got a 51%. And the gate teacher knows me, and I know her, obviously. And she just said, I'm really sorry. She can retake it. She needs to study all of these things, but she's ADHD and she doesn't have the study skills. Unfortunately, she had a wonderful, amazing fifth grade teacher who she looped with. She also had as a third grade teacher. And this teacher made a lot of accommodations, which helped her be really successful and feel really good in that class. But this switch to the sixth grade where she's switching classes and the teachers don't know her as well. She doesn't really have the self-advocacy skills. She doesn't know when to ask for help. And so we're working through some things. But I'm really trying to bring her into that process and talk to her about what's working, what's not working, why aren't those things working, and letting her kind of find some of those solutions to manage some of those academics. It's not that she can't do it. We know that she has the ability to do it. It's all of these other things that are getting in the way. So we have to figure out a way to kind of clear that path for her. So with those few things being said, actually, let me mention one other thing about the diagnosis piece. If you're still on the fence about it, I want you to realize that giving your child a label of autism or ADHD or giftedness or dyslexia or whatever, they're already getting labeled. If you're not labeling them with a type of neurodiversity or whatever, they're being labeled as unmotivated or lazy or whatever. And those are the messages that they're internalizing. And at least if we give it an official name, then they know what to call it. So as I mentioned, so this is something that is from that book that's coming out in January. Based on my work with my clients here at the office, I came up with what I really feel like are the 5 skills that all twice exceptional kids need. And so I'll touch on these a little bit and talk about some ways that you can kind of implement them. And I just want you to kind of really be able to reflect on these and think about, like, how does my kid do with this? How could they build this skill? Where do they need help with this? And so hopefully this will give you some insights into that. So the first skill that I feel is so important for twice exceptional kids is self-advocacy. So it's, actually it's funny. I mentioned this in the presentation to the gifted ed teachers earlier today. I just finished recording earlier today a podcast episode with Dr. Joy Lawson Davis and Deb Douglas, who are the authors of a new book called Empowering Underrepresented Gifted Students. And specifically, the main topic of this is how do we empower gifted kids to self-advocate? And they had a really great definition of self-advocacy that really had to do with, approaching their experiences and their environments and, accessing not only what they need, but also what they deserve. And so we want kids to be aware of what they need so that they can really communicate those needs. And this is a skill for neurodivergent kids that will follow them through a lifetime because, it would be ideal if we lived in a society where everybody's needs were always met and all environments were accommodating for whatever types of, sensory needs or executive function needs somebody might have. However, that's not actually how the world works, and often it requires self-advocacy in order to get those things. And so we want to make sure that kids have those. So the first step to this is self-scaffolding. So scaffolding in the psychological sense and educational sense is a term that we use that basically means we are building the supports for a child to reach their instructional level, which is the area that's just beyond where they are independent. So like if I can read, this level of text and I want to grow, I want to get to that next level, we're going to scaffold those skills. We're going to give them the supports that they need just to reach that next level until they're able to do it independently. Self-scaffolding, though, is really about having kids do it themselves, like recognize what are the supports that they need and how do they build those things around them. So, for example, one of the things that I have developed is I have an organizational skill. It is an organizational skill that is specifically a strategy about how I organize the things that I need to do. And basically I have one big planner and everything goes in that one big planner. I can't have different calendars. I can't have different apps on my phones, because it's too many places to get all of the information. I need everything all in one place. So that's an accommodation that I have experimented with and figured out over the years. And now that works for me. So I've self-scaffolded and found that just right level of support that works for me. So when we're helping kids to self-scaffold, a big part of what that is giving them options and opportunities to try out different things to figure out what works so that they know how to get those things, how to access them wherever they might be. The thing about being neurodivergent is that, neurodiversity is lifelong. You're not going to one day just be ungifted, un-ADHD, unautistic. That's not how it works. And while you can definitely build a lot of skills, I feel like a lot of it comes down to more like life hacks. So for example, another thing that a lot of ADHDers struggle with is task initiation. So, but the ADHD brain really thrives on things that are new and novel and interesting. So if you're struggling with starting a task, how can you just tweak it just a little bit so it feels fresh, it feels new? Maybe I'm going to make a game of it and I'm going to try to time how long it takes me to empty the dishwasher and see if I can do it, well, I guess without breaking any dishes, but do it really quickly. Or, I don't know, there are apps on phones that you can use that kind of gamify building different habits. One of them is called Habitica, which is a really fun one. It kind of has little graphics, kind of like an old school Zelda game or something. And, but how can you figure out what are the tools that work for you to help you work around those areas that are more difficult? And that's what self-scaffolding really is. The next piece of this is just building independence. And so when we are coaching and guiding kids to self-advocate, we want them to do it themselves. We are definitely there with them to walk through them, to help them with it, but we want them to really be the ones who are speaking for themselves. And, one great example of this is I have some students, some clients who I work with who have a lot of anxiety, specifically around when school begins and what they need to do in order to be successful in those environments. But one of the things that I'll ask them to do sometimes is, instead of having their parent write an email or, just waiting until something happens and they have to try to speak up, we sit there and we script a letter together. And it's a letter from them and they send it or bring it to their teacher or whatever. And it kind of just talks about, like, what are the things that I need? What are the things that work for me? I get really anxious when somebody calls on me and I don't know that they're going to call on me. And so I really need you to kind of like give me a heads up first before you call on me, because I'll just freeze. Or, I really get very anxious if I have to find my own groups in class. And so it's really helpful to me if you will make sure that you place me in a group, so that I don't have to go and have an awkward conversation to ask somebody to be in a group with me. These are all things that they could include in that letter. And again, that's fostering that independence. They're being proactive. They're recognizing the things that they need. And part of that also kind of goes along with this next one, which is flexible thinking. Self-advocacy really requires our kids to engage in flexible thinking, because they have to do some problem solving and they have to build some confidence in trying to find different solutions, because you can't self-advocate without attempting to have some sort of a solution. So here's my need. This is what I think would work. Can we make that happen, or something like that? And so, this is a really, really good piece for them as well, to be able to look at those problems in different ways. And then the last part of it is just the problem solving. And so if you are coaching your child and helping them to build self-advocacy skills, the easiest first thing that you can do at home is, when they start to talk to you or have any questions, or they are trying to self-advocate with you, just the best response you can have is just hear them out and just give them lots of wait time. Because a lot of times what will happen is a kid will say, like, oh, I'm having such and such problem. And, they just kind of blurt out, like, this is the problem, but they don't necessarily have a solution. So you can ask them clarifying questions and say, well, tell me more about that. Or what have you tried? And a lot of times kids aren't sure where to go with that. Especially some of our twice exceptional kids who maybe who need a little bit of extra processing time as they think about things. Don't jump in and answer for them. As hard as it is, let them have the space to think and come up with a response. And it's so easy, and I am guilty of it, trust me. It's so easy to jump in because we know our kids really well. And so we go, well, is it this? Or is it that? Or what about this? And that's not really, we're taking away that autonomy. We're taking away that opportunity for them to come up with their own solutions. So even if in a conversation, if you need to say, well, I know that you need to think about this, let's come back to it tomorrow or later today or whatever. Let them really try to come up with some possible solutions to try to solve those problems, even if it's not a very good solution. Like let them try it. Like what really is often the harm? It's like we can help them to self-advocate and try to come up with some things, and that then will empower them to try something again the next time. So skill number 2 is emotional regulation. A lot of twice exceptional kids, a lot of gifted kids in general, sometimes struggle with very intense emotions and emotional regulation. And so some of the things that we really want to be able to do is recognize the different types of arousal that kids might have. So we might have either hyper arousal, which is kind of like stress, tight muscles, tense jaw, overthinking or ruminating. They're kind of in that flight or fight space. And then we also have hypoarousal, which is where they shut down and they might just be like very loose muscle tone or just kind of sitting and just kind of unresponsive. They really just can't speak sometimes. And, so this is kind of that freeze space. And we want to make sure that kids are starting to realize these things because, when they're struggling with emotional regulation, it's often in one of these two worlds. It's kind of one of these two spaces. So helping them to identify either one of those is a good starting point for this. So one of the things that I came up with that I included in the book is it's called the I CAN method for emotional regulation. So basically, it's a 4-step process that we can coach kids through. And it's just breaking down the steps of emotional regulation into things that are very discrete so that we can really focus on this skill because these are skills that can be built. It's not always easy, but they can be built. So the first step is investigate. So this really involves just building some awareness surrounding dysregulation. Understanding and recognizing the signals that indicate that those emotions are about to intensify. Like I was talking about on the last slide, what are the signs of that hypo or hyper arousal? And when you start to notice those things, how can you kind of be aware of them? One way that you can help kids investigate their emotions is just to kind of track changes and make observations and really just be, non-judgmental. So like I notice that when you're starting to get upset, you interrupt and you won't really listen if somebody else has a suggestion. Or I notice that when you get really quiet, it usually means that you're feeling worried about something. You could come up with some sort of a system, to help them really regulate or identify some of those physiological symptoms of stress and anxiety or dysregulation, whatever that might be. I'll often actually go through and draw a diagram with my clients and label all of the psychosomatic symptoms of dysregulation that they might experience. So whether it's, if having an upset stomach or even like their thoughts are racing, or they're clenching their jaw, bringing that to their awareness and investigating it is kind of the first step to emotional regulation. The second step is to communicate. So once we're starting to notice that we're dysregulated, we really need to communicate that with somebody. So the biggest, most important piece of this is building emotional literacy. We want kids to be able to label their emotions and identify them. And this can be really difficult for some kids. Some neurodivergent kids may experience what's called alexithymia. Alexithymia is I guess it's a condition. I don't know exactly what to call it, but basically what it means is that it's somebody who really has a difficult time identifying their emotions. This is often related to a hypo reactivity to sensory input, especially interoception. So if you have a child who has some sensory processing difficulties, if they can't really notice how their body is reacting, it might be very difficult for them to identify or investigate those emotions and therefore label them and use some emotional literacy to communicate that with you. But ultimately, this, again, it is a skill that can be built. One of my favorite tools to use is a wheel of emotions. You can Google it. There are a million of them out there. You can print one off. I have some printed off that I've actually colored basically like the colors from the Inside Out movie. But essentially what a wheel of emotions is a circle. It's kind of like, it's got spokes like a wheel coming out, and there are like different tiers. And so on the innermost tier are like the most basic emotions: happy, sad, angry, disgust. I can't remember the other, surprise, and something else. And so those are all there. And then as it goes out, though, those spokes of the wheel, it narrows it down and it gives more specific language for for identifying those emotions. And so this is a great tool. It's almost like a little menu that kids can use to find that just right emotion word. And I think for gifted kids, especially if they're a child who has a really advanced vocabulary, they might really love this to help really, it's not that I'm just angry. It's that I'm frustrated and disappointed, or, just really, I don't know, pick an emotion word. I'm reluctant to go do this thing. They might really enjoy that, but they have to communicate that emotion, because in order to regulate those emotions, being able to share that with somebody, or at least label it for themselves, is really important. The third step is to activate. So once we have investigated, we kind of recognize those signs, and we've communicated that we're starting to get emotionally dysregulated, we want to activate some problem-solving skills. So that might include assessing the size of the problem, or using some cognitive flexibility to understand why they are dysregulated and what some possible, solutions for the problem might be. And, that's really just kind of that step right before kind of taking the action. But you have to kind of slow down enough to just be able to evaluate what's going on. And then the fourth step is to navigate. So that's when you just get through it. You navigate the emotional dysregulation with specific strategies, and then you are able to kind of return to that, place where you're feeling regulated. This is a good opportunity at this point also to reflect back what worked, what didn't. You kind of circle back to that investigation piece. So investigate, communicate, activate, navigate. That's the 4-step ICAN method for emotional regulation. Step 3 of the 5 skills that all twice exceptional kids need is based in executive functioning. So executive functioning difficulties influence almost all neurodivergent people in some way, whether they are an ADHDer, they're autistic, they're dyslexic. So executive functioning skills cover a lot of different areas. So it's all what's happening kind of up here in the prefrontal cortex, and it's based in, the things that kind of make everything click and come online. So decision-making skills, like time management and prioritizing and planning, behavioral regulation skills, and look, I'm behind on my slide here, sorry. Behavioral regulation skills like task initiation and sustained attention, and then processing skills like cognitive flexibility and metacognition. So when I mentioned that a lot of neurodivergent people have executive functioning difficulties, so ADHDers obviously have a lot of trouble with like time management, or they have difficulty with, just kind of like organizing their thoughts, like what order they need to do things in, because they kind of bounce around a little bit. A lot of times autistic individuals also have difficulty kind of sequencing things in their mind, which is an executive functioning difficulty, or transitioning from one task to another and adjusting their expectations. Even individuals with specific learning disabilities like dyslexia often have, for example, poor working memory. So if you think about the steps that go into sounding out a word and the phonological processing that goes into it, if you're unable to hold those sounds that those letters make in your short-term memory and string them together because you have a poor working memory, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to read. So that's one factor that could be influencing by executive functioning skills there. And it's often the case that a lot of these things kind of overlap as well. So the best strategies that we can use to support those executive functioning skills are through both accommodations. So what are the tools that work to help overcome that? And the second piece is just awareness, like recognizing what those difficulties are. So here's an example of a way that I worked with a client who was really struggling with getting his homework done more than anything. He was getting really overwhelmed. He didn't ever want to start his homework because it felt like it took him forever and ever to get it done. And so we actually came up with a plan for him to just practice estimating the time that it was going to take him to do his homework. So we created a little chart. I said, okay, I want you to write down the start time and the end time. First I want you to estimate how long your assignment's going to take. Then I want you to write down the start time and the end time, how much time it actually took, and were you over or under. So in addition to realizing that he was often overestimating how long the homework would take, it also really helped him build the skill to be able to better estimate how long certain tasks would take. And if you can estimate really pretty accurately how long a task will take, you can use it a little bit more easily to kind of put those building blocks together, as far as like, okay, what do I need to get done? How do those puzzle pieces fit together? Time time blindness is a term that you might hear thrown around in the neurodiversity community, and that is a real thing. But I really do believe that especially for those things that are done on a regular basis, very frequently, we can build just that knowledge, even if we're not great at estimating it automatically, especially if it's a novel task. If we know, okay, it takes me this many minutes to do this particular task from start to end, we can just kind of have that rote memorization about what that is, and that can be a really useful tool. But that's a way that we can build that awareness, and then we can also come up with an accommodation. So for example, actually using a visual schedule, that would be the accommodation. And so we have the awareness, so we build the skill, and then we use the visual schedule as an accommodation to help visualize it and keep us on track with things. And so executive functioning is, again, something that is we want kids to be aware of. We want them to realize what they're struggling with there, and then also help them to make the accommodations in order to handle those situations. The fourth skill is effective communication. It's really important, to help our kids communicate effectively, because it influences not only social relationships, but it influences professional settings. A lot of times neurodivergent kids are a little bit oblivious to specific power hierarchies, like in academic settings. They don't necessarily understand why a teacher, just because they're the adult in the room, is in charge. And there can be some difficulties there with effective communication. Additionally, for neurodivergent kids, there might be other misinterpretations. So I'm reminded, as I'm talking about this, about a student that I worked with who was very gifted and also autistic. And he was very literal with the way he interpreted things. And so when the teacher would ask him to do things, he was also a perfectionist. So he would kind of misunderstand the instructions a lot of times. And he would say, "What do you want me to do on this?" And she would say, "Well, I just want you to read the directions and give it a try." And he said, "I don't know what you want me to do on this." And she basically would interpret his lack of willingness to try as defiance, or him saying, "I don't know what you want me to do," as being rude, when really it's he was being really truthful. He really didn't know. But that because of that communication difficulty, he was seen as a discipline problem. Now, I would contend that maybe more of that problem lies with the teacher in that particular situation. But in general, helping kids to understand effective communication, understand perspective taking, and try to make good guesses about what other people are thinking can be really important for them to be successful. It kind of is really closely related to the self-advocacy skill. How do we adjust how we communicate for different settings? And I think also, a lot of times we want kids to have good peer relationships and we want them to be happy. And so, finding opportunities for them to connect with like-minded peers is really important. We also know that, communication today is a lot different for kids than it was when we were growing up. The texting and all of the electronic messaging and everything. And there are different social rules for that, which honestly, I don't know that I even know all of them. But we want to make sure that kids know, it's okay, you can't just continue to email somebody over and over and over again, or text somebody over and over and over again. I always laugh. I used to use the example of a tennis match. Okay, you want to hit the ball over to them. It's communications like this. And so you want to hit the ball over to them, and then you want them to hit it back to you. And of course, I'm doing a group on social skills. Maybe it was a group on social skills. And one of the gifted, twice exceptional kids looks at me and goes, "Well, really in tennis, the goal is to hit the ball so they can't hit it back to you." And I'm like, you know what? You know where I'm going with this. Don't be so literal with it. And we had a good laugh. But it was, but the point is that we need to talk to kids about these things. I think something else to just keep in mind for all gifted kids, but especially 2E kids, if we don't provide explicit instructions for things, we're going to miss opportunities to teach them particular skills. It's so easy for us to assume that kids, because they're bright, understand certain situations, and a lot of times they just don't. Sometimes we just need to step back and take a moment and go, hang on, I think maybe there's something missing here. Tell me what you think about the situation, or why did you do this particular thing? And we'll realize that there's really just some misunderstanding there that we didn't even think to consider, because maybe to us it's common knowledge or common sense. So, taking the time to really be explicit about what does effective communication look like and how do we use it can be really, really helpful for kids. The last skill that I want to talk about is self-directed motivation. So my favorite theory of motivation, because I guess I'm a person who has a favorite theory of motivation. I don't know. Now that I say it, it sounds really silly, but we're going to go with it anyway. But my favorite theory of motivation is the self-determination theory of motivation. So self-determination theory of motivation looks deeply at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But what I like about it is that it breaks them down into much more discrete parts. So we're not just intrinsically or extrinsically motivated, it's a continuum, and it recognizes that between those two, there are a variety of steps, and that most things that we do on some level are extrinsically motivated. So if you are having, if you have a job that you get paid for, or you're doing something that you really love, plus you're getting, a good grade for it or a chance to get into college, or if you're just doing something because it's the social expectation, or if you're doing something because you want a prize or you want to avoid a punishment. Like, those are all different levels of motivation within this theory. And I think when we talk to kids about this, we can help them realize that even if they're not totally intrinsically motivated to do a particular task, they can still regulate and do that. So there are three main ingredients that Ryan and Desi talk about as far as what we need in any environment to feel this self-directed motivation, and that without these three ingredients, we tend to be unmotivated or have a harder time regulating that motivation. So the first piece is autonomy or agency. Every person needs to feel like they have some control over their environment, like they have a way to interact and have a say about what's happening in their lives. It was kind of like going back to what I was talking about when I was in 5th grade and I wouldn't write those spelling words 5 times each. I didn't feel like I had any autonomy in that situation. So you know what I wasn't going to do? I was just going to dig in my heels. I wasn't going to do it. I was not motivated to do it because there wasn't any sense of agency there. Now, you know what? If my teacher had given me harder spelling words or really challenged me, I would have done it in an instant. I don't know that I would have written them 5 times each, but I would have learned them. I would have done something else. Writing them 5 times each seemed really tedious to me. But we want kids to have that sense of autonomy and agency. The second piece is competence. We need to give kids tasks that are, again, kind of just at that right level of challenge for them. We don't want them to be too difficult. We also don't want them to be too easy. This is why gifted education is so important for our bright students, because if you put a child in a classroom where everything is just too easy, they might feel competence as far as yeah, I can do it, but they're not going to feel competence like a sense of challenge, a sense of motivation, a sense of flow, which is where you have that focus and that challenge and everything that's just kind of right in that zone where you're really, able to create and learn. So having competence is a really important skill. So we want to make sure that, how are kids being challenged? What are they learning in certain situations? And then the third piece is relatedness. So how do we have connections with our kids? What are their connections? Connections can be with people. They can also be with topics. You might have a child who's super into Minecraft or whatever, and they might have, if they have some autonomy and some competence there, they could go all day and learn all of the things about Minecraft. They don't necessarily have to have a relatedness with a person, but it can be a person, and especially with parents and teachers, especially when we're asking kids to do something maybe that they're just not as intrinsically motivated to do. They need to feel safe. They need to feel trust. They need to know that we're not going to ask them to do something that they can't do. And again, if we have all three of these ingredients, we can help kids feel motivated. Sometimes that autonomy or that agency might be, being able to change how their routine for how they get ready in the morning, or that competence might just be like figuring out what could be not too difficult for them, but that they can just kind of do on their own as well. And we want to just make sure that they feel comfortable coming and talking to us about it. And so if you have a child who's not motivated, whether it's things around the house or things at school, I would encourage you to reflect and see, is there one of these three pieces that's missing? And if so, how could you reestablish it? How could you make sure that they're feeling connected and that they feel like they're competent at the task and that they have a sense of agency? And a lot of times, if you can tweak some of those things and talk to them and bring them into that process, you can help them find that self-directed motivation. So a neurodiversity affirming family accepts each other, learns about each other, and grows together. And if you are a twice exceptional parent or a parent to a twice exceptional kid, or just here because you're curious or you're a teacher, I'm so glad that you attended and hope you gained something from this. Here's where you can contact me. So I love to hang out on Twitter, but you can also find our podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And on Facebook, we actually have a neurodiversity podcast advocacy and support group, which is a great place just to connect with other parents and educators, ask questions, that sort of thing. So anyway, thank you so much. We have a little bit of time for Q&A, I think.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that we've got some teachers on here. I'd like to ask if we've got some parents, if they are willing to put their questions in the chat so it's easier for people to hear them and listen to them later. That way we can easily respond to them and have a chance to go back if we need to. So it looks like, oh, we did have somebody mention this, and I'm sure you were not looking at the chat while you were presenting, but someone mentioned that there is a Wheel of Emotions pillow.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that. Actually, one of my counselors just in the other office over here, she has one. Yeah.
So somebody brought that forward. If anybody has some questions, please put it in the chat and I'll go ahead and ask it. We do also have people on Facebook, and I'll put out there if they have questions, they can put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them as well. Let's see, does anybody have any questions? Well, I will ask a question because, and Elizabeth Warner knows my story. We've worked together for many years with my youngest. I do have two students in the PD schools. They are both now in high school, but we're not through this journey, as you mentioned. And I do have a twice exceptional or multi-exceptional, which I heard for the first time in the Arizona Association of Gifted and Talented presentation a few weeks ago. So I guess I would ask if there was one thing with the younger students of parents of younger students, how would you help guide them to start this journey, right? Because we all encounter this journey at different points. It took us until our daughter was through second grade. We went up and down for the years before that. And we finally had her diagnosed with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. And the challenges of what do you now do that you have a diagnosis, if you could share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So like once they have a diagnosis and they're starting on that path, where should they go? I mean, I think one of the best things that you can do, I guess, is just start collaborating with the school and talking about what you're noticing there and making sure that they're providing some supports, whatever that is. I think finding, like-minded groups of people that you can communicate with and can support you is also really important. And so that might look like an online community. That might just be, I don't know, it might be local groups perhaps, but lots of ways to kind of connect that way as well. I think that probably those are just some good starting points. But again, of course, it always really is influenced by each individual child. They all just need different things. And so, helping them build their confidence, helping them realize that they're not broken. It's just the way that their brain works, and helping them to appreciate that about themselves, I think, is really important. I don't, it's kind of just a process though, and it changes. I often mention a lot of my clients who I have are really long-term clients, and partially that is because if you're a neurodivergent learner, like it's not like all of a sudden one day you're going to be neurodivergent. Like that's going to just be there. And so quite often, you might handle one situation and overcome one difficulty, but then something else might come up that could just happen, or things just change as they get older. So you're constantly kind of readjusting and recalibrating your strategies. So just know that if you try something and it doesn't work right away, or it works for a little bit and then it stops working and you have to recreate that, that's normal. But that's okay too. Like, don't get frustrated or discouraged, just because you have to do that as well.
Sure, I would say that what is normal is always transitioning,
Yes.
because the child is learning and growing and changing and adapting, especially with the twice exceptional. So what we found with our dyslexic is she was reading, but she wasn't. She was memorizing things
Yeah.
and telling her own stories.
Yeah.
But we did have someone to posted sharing what you discover working at home is very important to share with the teachers. Common language and strategies breed security and foster success.
Agree.
And how parents can do this effectively. And thank you, Deborah Adams, for sharing that. We also have several other teachers on the panel. I noticed Dr. Hudson is here, who is our middle school. She's got her video on. Our middle school multi-exceptional teacher that handles that at one of our schools. So thank you for being here. Do we have any other parents that would like to ask any questions? Oh, here's a question. Let's see. How can you help your twice exceptional kid, but still be able to maintain a good relationship with them at home, or with them in general? As a parent, if I have to be their prefrontal cortex, it tends to feel like I'm nagging them. The alternative is that they forget to complete and turn in their work and won't ask for help.
Yeah. It is difficult. And I think I wish there was like a quick and easy answer to that. I mean, I think it's a process. I think it's a gradual, being able to recede from that. Sometimes some people might say, well, just let them experience the natural consequences. And it's like, I don't know. Sometimes that doesn't always work for these kids. It might work like for a very short amount of time, but sometimes they have very short memories. I don't know. But I guess here's really the best advice that I could give on that. Start with one very, very small, specific task that they can accomplish and feel successful with, and help them build that particular skill, even if you're nagging them in all of these other skills. But hopefully if they start to get a little bit of momentum in one area, you can start to kind of generalize that to other areas. You might move it to a different area and see some progress there, and then this other one regresses, but that's all going to gradually move things forward. They will be learning things as they go through that. But I know that's frustrating, and it is hard. It is hard to be a parent of a 2E or I actually multi-exceptional. We talked about that during the teacher one as well. It's like, it's really probably a better name, but 2E is what's kind of caught on. There are a lot of people though who are not just 2Es. But anyway, it's hard. I mein, it's like, I do this all the time. And it's like, and I go home and it's like, yesterday when I was talking to my daughter, I'm like, oh, Maggie, I'm like, you're going to, what? She's rushing through all her work so she can get online, because they have one-to-one Chromebooks, and she wants to get online and do what she wants to do on there. I'm like, ugh, she doesn't. So anyway, I don't know. Now I'm just venting. I don't, but it's hard, and just kind of keep with it though, slowly but surely.
So you couldn't possibly be a parent of a 2E kid and have the need to vent. We really understand.
And it's fine. I mean, I love her, and she's so. This is what I feel like with her. I'm sure some of you can relate, but like with my son who's in eighth grade, like he's 2E, but he kind of gets by. He does okay with it. Like, I think he's a little more spectrumy, to be very honest, but he has a diagnosis of ADHD, which I think is also accurate, but he's kind of a rule follower. So he'll kind of do this stuff. I worry about him though, because like when he gets out of school, I don't know that he really knows what he wants to do or how to, like, he doesn't really have like that future orientation, which is also an executive functioning skill. Maggie, on the other hand, I just got to get her through high school. She's creative and brilliant and will do amazing things. I just got to get her through. If I can get her to graduate, I think we'll be okay. So we got 6 more years. See how it goes.
And I think there are parents on this, I can completely relate of, how do we manage the system? Because that is one of the challenges, is our school systems are not designed for these kids. So sometimes it is, how do we get them through these 12 grades, right?
Yeah.
So
I never considered homeschooling as much as I have in the last few weeks, and that's scary for me because I do not want to homeschool my kids.
Well, speaking of that, a parent that has taken on homeschooling that actually just posted something, just said, "This made my day. Nice to feel like the little dude isn't so different for a night. Great strategies and so relatable. Thank you for your time."
Oh, thank you so much.
And we really do appreciate this. Elizabeth, is there more you would like to add in there? You just, you can say that.
I just wanted to encourage you, adult 2E children are delightful. I love them dearly, raising 2 of them. So I just want to say thank you so much. What a inspiration this has been today. I totally have enjoyed sitting this close and hearing your message. So we thank you so much. And parents, please reach out to us. We have so many resources, and teachers the same. We would love to support you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just saw that message from Rebecca. I was like, I recognize that name, Rebecca, from the podcast group on Facebook and everything. So anyway, yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Well, I hope we'll link to your podcast so we can throw it out there when we do our Facebook. It will save in the United Parent Council Facebook group. The schools don't have, they have a communications thing, but we have our own Facebook. And then we do have our YouTube channel for our, all of the United Parent Council programs that we put on. And we have a sub, folder for all of our gifted presentations. So we will try to be linking some stuff in there that we can. So again, thank you so much. And this has been great for me personally. And I know for these other parents, we will have a lot more people view this. One of the things that the last year has shown us with connectivity through Zoom and presentations, we tend to spike between 100 and 200 followers that view it within the next few days. But usually within the next month, it can increase many more times over that, depending on the subject matter. So Thank you for joining us. Elizabeth, I'll leave it to you.
All right, so thank you so much. And everyone, please check out the recordings. And we look forward to seeing you again on November 18th for our next Gifted on the Go speaker series.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording and we will end